Ooh. Now this is like a fun professional railroad documentary. Not horses, wait a minute. Is this the correct? Oh! Jay! Every year on Memorial Day weekend, me and my dad go on a big trip to Chicagoland just for the sake of filming trains. Normally, we go to Bensonville Yard as our main destination, and this trip was no different. This part will be the first one, covering all of the stuff I saw on Canadian National. I really wasn't planning to stop at any CN destinations on this trip aside from a brief stop at Homewood Yard to see the Blue Devil, but I watched a great video called Ghost of the J by TRTR, which made me realize that there were J units working the East End pull-down jobs in CN's Kirkyard in Gary, Indiana. Being that this was really close and I had to pass through Gary anyway to get to the rest of Chicagoland, I decided it would be worth a stop to catch the pull-down job. When we pulled into Gary, we started driving down the main street and noticed a bunch of South Shore cars just sitting there. We made it to the main spot to catch the East End Trimmers, the best one, Virginia Street, which has actually been renamed to Malcolm X Drive in recent years. However, of course, our rail fanning at this spot couldn't start without us getting scanned, because as soon as we pulled in, before I even got the chance to get my camcorder out, we were jump scared by the Amtrak Blue Water on the Norfolk Southern Chicago line. I've never seen this train before, and of course I didn't get any picture or video of it as it was passing over the bridge. Oof. Taking a look directly in front of us to the unfortunately trespassing area, which is currently U.S. Steel property, we see some cars from the CSX Coke Express, either B157 or B158, being unloaded at the steel mill. Then I heard a horn and quickly whipped my camcorder around because I thought something was coming on the Norfolk Southern Chicago line. As it turned out, it was actually on the South Shore. The problem with this spot is there are 4 tracks that parallel and you can only see 2 at a time. And that was further exemplified when 2 Death Stars showed up running on the Gary Railway out in the distance. I got jump scared by these 2, hence the crappy shot. I really don't know why they were here. With no sign of the pull-down job, we decided to go to the park, which is less than a mile away from the spot, where an E&J Mikado number 765 is currently on display. The loco isn't in the greatest condition, but it's awesome that it's here, considering this is the only surviving J steam engine. However, as we were looking at it, we heard the roar of SD-38s climbing the grade. We were, obviously, when that happened, so we jumped in the car, drove back to Virginia Street, only to find that the trimmer had already cleared. We got a look at it and saw that there were, in fact, 2 J units and a regular CN one on it. Being that there was no way we were going to miss this super rare consist, we blasted down this conveniently placed road and barely managed to beat them to another spot, which I believe is the last crossing they actually cross over before stopping and reversing back into the yard. This was the pullout, so this is the farthest they go before eventually continuing doing their switching over the hump in CN's Kirkyard. Said last crossing is this bridge, which we barely managed to beat them to. They rolled to a stop, and we realized there was a large patch of gravel right next to an electric substation that we could walk up to see them start reversing. And oh boy, were we treated to some great EMD noises as they started to shove their cut back towards the yard. In the consist were two Elgin Joliet and Eastern SD38-2s, numbers 671 and 673. The 671 is in mostly pristine condition, while the 673 has had some patching over the cab just to keep its number visible. Leading CN unit is also awesome, a rare SD40U rebuild, of which very few were done. Seeing that this consist was so good and going so slow, we decided to drive back to Malcolm X Drive so we could catch the units again. They took quite a while to get here as they had to keep stopping and starting, as they can only send 5 cars over the hump at a time. This little concrete raised area is probably the most iconic spot to shoot the Kirk Yard trimmers from, and so I wanted a shot of them going over the spot. I would definitely like to return to Kirk eventually to see the other 3 sets of trimmers, but out of the 4, I think this is the most interesting one for me personally, since I am a massive J fan. Anyways, I'll shut up now so you can hear more awesome EMDs. As I said previously, the CN loco here is an SD40U rebuild, number 6001, one of the first SD40Us. As you can probably tell, these locomotives are SD40-2 rebuilds, with the cab swapped out for a slightly different and more spacious design. They are nicknamed long noses by CN rail fans since they also increase the length of the nose to accommodate special equipment and a more advanced toilet than a standard SD40. Most of these locos worked up on the Iron Range for a very, very long time, but as far as I can tell, 6001 here has been working in Kirk Yard for at least a decade. The Kirk Yard East and hump engines very, very, very rarely get swapped out, which explains why there's still J units here. I guarantee you they have not moved since the days of the J themselves, or at the very least were assigned to the yard extremely soon after the J was taken over by the CN. After clearing the concrete area, they stopped on the bridge over Malcolm X Drive, which allowed me to get this one special photo of the J logo on the 671. We also saw another bridge as we were driving out, which actually still had the E&JE logo intact. That was all we wanted to see in Kirk Yard, as most of the yard is pretty inaccessible and off limits. We would have gone rail fanning at Pine Junction, but I only recently learned that that place is super dangerous and you can get kicked out by CN cops, and I'm not going to risk that. We decided then to go to Homewood, and hilariously, while we were driving, we got stopped by a train, which turned out to actually be a Mao truck on the CSX. Unlike the last few trips to Homewood, as soon as we got there, the action was already beginning. This crazy consist, with an SD60 in the lead, C44-9WL in second, BNSF Gevo in third, and a CN SD75M at the back, was reversing into the yard. I sadly couldn't get enough time to climb onto the platform before these guys managed to sneak their way into the yard. When I finally did make it up onto said platform, we saw the 4 units sitting right here next to this auto rack. We thought that they might go pick it up, however, we noticed a crew member decoupling the BNSF unit from the other 2 interesting units. And it wasn't long before the CN75M and BNSF engine took off without the other 2. Then the 2 units started reversing onto that auto rack train, but they did have to stop halfway through so the conductor could get off and switch the switches to that specific track. However, as he was doing that, he actually told me that the 2 other units would be moved into the shops later, meaning that they would go through the platform and I would get to see them. They coupled up to the auto rack, but for reasons unknown to me, they sat there for quite a while, which at the very least gave me time to film this Metro Electric train. As I've said in previous videos, I don't really like Metro Electric because they don't have locomotives, so they're pretty boring, but it's a train, and Homewood is usually pretty dead most of the time, so I'm still gonna film it, why wouldn't I? After that passed, 2 CN units, a Gevo and SD70M-2, pulled out of quite literally nowhere, headed through a little bit of the yard, and parked on the small loco storage track over in this area. I was pretty excited, as I had to drive that way to see the Blue Devil anyway, and so we decided we were going to make a quick stop when we were doing that to take a look at these 2 units up close. As I said, Homewood is usually pretty dead, so I was shocked to be seeing how much activity there was on this day. And that was further emphasized when another Metro Electric showed up, this time heading the other way. And now we looked back at the C44-9WL and SD60 and thought to ourselves, yeah, they're going to go into the shops, but what if that track directly behind them takes them to the shops? I should have had a functioning brain and realized it doesn't, and they would have had to have passed us. However, I had brought my new drone, which you might have seen, on this trip, and I needed an excuse to test it out. So I decided to fly it over to there. We got it out and hooked it up, and it said that we couldn't fly because it was too windy. Then it took off. It took off without connection for no reason. The blades were only spinning a little bit, so my dad was able to hold it down briefly while I looped underneath the underside to press the off button and cut my finger twice on the propeller blades. And I'm telling you, it hurt. Yet you want to see it? No? Here it is. After 2 days of healing, because I'm recording this on the Monday after the weekend for this trip. Yeah, trust me, it was way worse after it actually happened. Anyways, we quickly wrapped a sock around my finger to stop it from bleeding because the two units were now reversing. Oh boy, what perfectly bad timing. As you can probably tell, I felt pretty defeated after this incident, but my mood was definitely boosted by getting to see these two rare units. Considering my finger that I used to hold my camcorder was bleeding and in immense pain during these two shots, they were pretty good, highlighting the ex-Oakway SD60 and the Canadian cab on the trailing Dash 9. Getting to see these two units was a real treat, as both of them have been on my bucket list to catch for years, but I very, very rarely see CN anymore, so I've basically written off ever seeing them. The ex-Oakway SD60s I've missed many, many times, and the C44-9WL just barely come around. The only other one I've seen was in BC Rail Tricolor. Anyways, after those guys made their way deep into the yard, the auto rack throttled up and finally left Homewood. And man, if you thought those J's were loud, yeah, this one was bursting my ears. With all the activity at the metro station more or less gone, we decided to head to the rest of Homewood Yard. However, before we left, we took a brief look at the Paducah Jeep rebuild at the Homewood Railfan Park. This locomotive obviously wears the old Illinois Central black paint and was put on here as a tribute to the IC. I did see this loco last time I was in Homewood, but that was pre-camcorder, so it was nice to get some much better and much more better lit shots of the unit, as well as the caboose that's right behind it. We then headed down the side of Homewood Yard and did end up stopping at that small loco storage siding with the GEVO and SD70M-2. It didn't take me long to realize the leading GEVO had an Illinois Central Death Star logo sticker placed on the middle of its Native Canadians Appreciation sticker, which is pretty interesting and probably put there by a random Illinois Central sympathizing crew. And the SD70M-2 behind it was nothing special. At the Maple Road pull-off, we got to see the C40-8 2124 and the Jeep 3010, which are used for locomotive engineer training. However, we didn't get to see the storage sidings because the CNOCS was parked with 3 coaches visible. White Bear Lake, I think that's how you say it, and Baton Rouge. The rest of the OCS train was parked here too, but not visible. We finessed our way through the trees, and eventually we did get a shot of the loco storage sidings from this angle. And the Blue Devil wasn't there. It was gone. I have no idea where it went, aside from a couple rumors stating it went down to Louisiana for continued storage. And there's also the SD75M here, but nobody cares about that unit. We were sad about the Blue Devil being missing, but our spirits were lifted when we headed over to Ashland Avenue and we got to see 3 more EMDs, starting with an Illinois Central Death Star number 1020, which is just sitting here waiting for maintenance at the locomotive shops, and then a set of locomotives, which most of the time does switching, but is currently just sitting here, with an Grand Trunk SD40-2 number 5937. And speaking of the Grand Trunk, yep, an actual GTW Jeep number 4933 was at the front of this set. A lot of Grand Trunk units work in Homewood Yard, and sadly this unit, I couldn't get that good of a photo of it because it was blocked by the literal barbed wire fence CN has outside of Homewood Yard. Seriously, this is way overkill. As I was walking back to the car, I did get to see an actual set of locomotives switching in the yard, which was just 2 Canadian cabs, which, don't get me wrong, they're cool, but they're not fallen flag units. And that was the last we saw of CN on this entire trip. I did get a lot of gems from them. Definitely the J units were the highlight, and also the C44-9WL and SD60 were also awesome. Despite getting a lot of bucket list units during my visits to the 2 CN locations, they were actually the least interesting of the 3 railroads I visited on this trip. Which doesn't say that CN was boring, but it shows how crazy BNSF and CPKC ended up being. So stay tuned for those videos when they come out. With all that said, I hope you enjoyed the video. Catch those units while you can, especially the J ones, and I'll see you in the next video.